fluorescent lights of the VA support group buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting a sickly pallor over James Cooper's weathered face. His fingers, calloused from years of labor meant to forget, traced the rim of his paper coffee cup, the liquid inside long gone cold and bitter, like the memories he'd kept buried for decades. The other veterans in the circle watched him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Cooper had attended these meetings for 3 years without speaking more than a few sentences. But tonight was different. Tonight, the darkness that had followed him home from the desert needed to be given voice, as if naming it might finally break its hold. February 17th, 1991, he began, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to scrape against the silence. Operation Desert Storm. I was with the 5th Special Forces Group, assigned to a 4-man reconnaissance team alongside Sergeant Marcus Wade, Private First Class Ryan Mitchell, and our Iraqi interpreter, Tariq Al-Fahad. Cooper's eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the circle, seeing not the institutional beige walls of the VA center, but the endless expanse of stars over the Iraqi desert. Intelligence had identified a series of bunkers near the Kuwait border that might contain strategic documents, troop movements, communication protocols, maybe even chemical weapons locations. Most had been abandoned in a hurry, typical evacuation chaos. But the last one, his voice faltered, and the group leader, Dr. Winters, leaned forward slightly, her practiced patience drawing him back from the precipice of silence. The last one was different, Cooper continued, his weathered hands now gripping the empty cup so tightly it began to deform. Command Bunker 37A. The heavy steel door designed to withstand bombing runs stood wide open when we arrived, like a mouth frozen mid-scream. No signs of forced entry. The locking mechanism had been disengaged from the inside, but there was no one there, at least no one we could see. The room seemed to darken as Cooper spoke, the boundaries between past and present growing thin, permeable. The bunker itself was immaculate, unnervingly so. Chairs pushed back from desks as if their occupants had simply stood up and walked away. Half-finished cigarettes in ashtrays, the ashes undisturbed by even the faintest desert breeze. Cups of tea, still filled but gone cold, lipstick on the rim of one, undisturbed. Sergeant Wade, a man I'd seen walk through active fire without flinching, took one look around that main room and crossed himself, something I'd never seen him do before or since. Cooper paused, taking a sip of his empty cup, going through the motions as if to ground himself in the present. We conducted a standard sweep, the layout matching our intelligence briefing. Command center, communications room, barracks, storage, everything in perfect order, except for what we found in the corridor leading to the communications room. The other veterans leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the gravity of his words. Arabic graffiti scrawled across an entire wall, not military codes or strategic information, something more desperate, more immediate. The lettering was jagged, some of it appearing to have been written in blood. Tariq, our interpreter, a former Baghdad University professor who'd been feeding intel to the Americans for years, took one look at it and went white as a sheet. When Wade ordered him to translate, he simply shook his head and said, "Some words are not meant to be spoken aloud. Some doors are not meant to be opened." That was when Mitchell pointed out that the graffiti wasn't directed toward the bunker's entrance. It was written as a warning to anyone trying to go deeper inside. Cooper's gaze finally returned to the present, scanning the faces in the circle. We had our orders. Command wanted any intelligence material secured immediately. The sandstorm that had been building all day made extraction impossible until morning. We were staying the night whether we liked it or not, so we set up a base in the command center, established watch rotations, and tried to ignore the feeling that despite all evidence to the contrary, we weren't alone in that bunker. Wade took first watch while Mitchell, Tariq and I tried to get some sleep. That was the last night all 4 of us would be ourselves. Cooper's turn at watch came at 0200 hours. his body still attuned to military precision despite the years that had passed. Something changed when the bunker got truly dark, he explained, eyes fixed on that middle distance only he could see. The emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow that made shadows move like living things. First came the footsteps, military boots on concrete, precise and measured, always just around the corner from wherever I looked. Then the shadows began to move independent of any light source, flowing across walls like black water. But it was the whispering that broke Mitchell. Cooper's voice dropped to match the intensity of his memory. It came through the ventilation system, voices speaking rapid-fire Arabic that seemed to rise and fall like a tide. Mitchell was our radio man, had a gift for languages. He swore they were repeating the same phrase over and over. It wears the flesh, it wears the flesh. When I went to investigate, I found a doorway in the eastern corridor, a heavy metal door with strange markings around the frame. A doorway none of us had seen during our initial sweep. The morning brought no relief, only the hollow-eyed stares of men who hadn't truly slept. Wade and Mitchell had experienced identical nightmares, Cooper continued, his fingers unconsciously tracing patterns on his thigh. Both described being pinned to their cots by invisible hands, unable to move or scream, while a dark figure watched from the corner of the room, its shape constantly shifting as if made of living smoke. Tariq finally broke his silence about the graffiti when Mitchell started bleeding from his ears during breakfast. Spontaneous, no explanation. The other veterans shifted uncomfortably as Cooper described the interpreter's revelation. Tariq told us the bunker had been built on top of something ancient, something the Iraqi military had uncovered while expanding the facility. The soldiers stationed here had reported similar experiences. Voices, apparitions, lost time. According to Tariq, they'd abandoned the bunker 3 weeks before we arrived, leaving in such haste they didn't even secure the door. Their commanding officer had left the warning on the wall. What sleeps in the deep room hungers for passage. Do not approach. Do not listen to its voices. It is not what it seems to be. The doorway led to a narrow corridor that sank deeper underground than the bunker's schematics indicated, Cooper said, his hands now trembling visibly. At its end stood another door, this one sealed with a complex locking mechanism and what looked like religious symbols etched into the metal. It took Wade and Mitchell nearly an hour to breach it. What we found inside will haunt me until my dying day. Cooper closed his eyes briefly, as if the memory physically pained him. A single metal chair bolted to the center of the floor, with restraints for arms, legs, and head. Not standard military issue. These were ancient, handcrafted from some strange metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The walls were covered in symbols, not Arabic, not any language Tariq recognized, something older. And beneath these symbols, overlapping like the desperate scratches of drowning men, were hundreds, perhaps thousands of tally marks, days counted, or victims. Most disturbing were the fingernail gouges that radiated outward from the chair, as if someone had been dragged to it, their nails leaving desperate furrows in the concrete as they fought against their fate. The night following their discovery changed everything. I woke to find myself standing outside the sealed room, my hand on the door handle, with no memory of leaving my cot. Cooper whispered, the support group now leaning forward as one to catch his words. My body had walked there without my consciousness, drawn like a puppet on strings. When I returned to our base in the command center, Tariq was missing. Wade and Mitchell were still asleep, unnaturally so. We couldn't wake them at first, as if they'd been drugged. We organized a search, checking every room, every corridor. The bunker's entrance remained secure, the sandstorm still raging outside. No one could have entered or left. Cooper's breathing became shallow, his eyes wide with remembered terror. We found no sign of Tariq until we checked the sealed room again. The heavy door stood open, though we'd secured it with everything available. In the center of the room, precisely under where the chair had been bolted, the chair that had somehow vanished without a trace, sat Tariq's standard-issue military boots, placed side by side with military precision, as if he'd simply stepped upward out of them and disappeared. Inside the right boot was a small scrap of paper with a single word written in Arabic, in what looked like blood, vessel. After Tariq vanished, we all began to change, Cooper continued, rubbing his temples as if the memory itself induced pain. I experienced blinding migraines that left me curled on the floor, vomiting. During these episodes, I'd lose time, minutes, sometimes hours, gone without trace. Wade found me once writing on the walls in symbols that matched those in the sealed room, my fingers bloody from dragging them across the concrete. I had no memory of doing it. Cooper's voice dropped to a haunted whisper. Mitchell suffered worse. He began speaking in languages he couldn't possibly know. Ancient Sumerian, according to what Tariq had told us before he disappeared. Wade, our medic as well as our sergeant, noted we all shared the same disturbing symptom. The sensation of someone else looking through our eyes, like being a passenger in our own bodies. When we finally established radio contact with headquarters, the sandstorm had intensified. No extraction possible for at least 48 hours. We were trapped with whatever had been released. That night, Cooper took watch alone, the others finally succumbing to exhausted sleep. I was drawn to the sealed room against my will, my body moving while my mind screamed in protest. The doorway was filled with a darkness deeper than absence of light, a presence, a substance that seemed to breathe and pulse. Within it formed a silhouette, not quite human in its proportions. His voice cracked with remembered terror. It spoke using Tariq's voice, but layered with something older, something that made my ears bleed to hear it. It explained that it had been imprisoned in this place for millennia by people long forgotten to history, trapped in a space between dimensions. The Iraqi military had unknowingly broken the seals while expanding the bunker. Cooper's hands trembled as he continued. It needed a living host, a vessel of flesh, to exist fully in our world. Tariq had been compatible but incomplete. It needed more. It needed all of us. I have tasted your fears, it said through Tariq's stolen voice. I have walked in your nightmares, and now you will carry me out into the world. I ran back to wake the others, but I was too late, Cooper said, his voice hollow with remembered horror. Mitchell's eyes had turned completely black, like pools of oil. He moved with jerky, unnatural motions, as if his body was being puppeteered by inexperienced hands. Wade was fighting against the same influence, his face contorted in a battle of wills, veins standing out on his forehead as he struggled to maintain control. Cooper's gaze dropped to his hands, now clenched into fists. Mitchell attacked first, displaying strength no human should possess. He threw me across the room like I weighed nothing, then went for Wade with inhuman focus. In the struggle, Wade's flashlight illuminated some of the symbols we'd seen in the sealed room. They were etched into the walls beneath layers of modern concrete, exposed where the plaster had cracked. He recognized them not as writing, but as a containment barrier, a prison built to hold something that couldn't be killed. Cooper looked up, his eyes haunted. Wade realized the entire bunker had been built on top of an ancient prison, the sealed room just its center point. Collapse it, he gasped as Mitchell's hands closed around his throat. Bury it all. In the chaos that followed, Cooper executed Wade's desperate plan. We carried demolition charges for destroying sensitive equipment if capture was imminent. I set them at structural points while fighting off Mitchell, who moved with the singular purpose of stopping me. Wade succumbed completely to the entity's control halfway through, turning on me with the same blank eyes and inhuman strength. Cooper's voice dropped to a whisper. I made it to the entrance as the charges detonated, the last one triggered remotely as I emerged into the sandstorm. The bunker collapsed inward, sealing whatever ancient evil had been imprisoned there beneath tons of concrete and steel and sand. He looked around at the support group, his eyes focusing on the present moment for the first time. The official report lists it as an accidental detonation, triggered by unstable Iraqi munitions. My temporary insanity was attributed to PTSD, Mitchell's and Wade's erratic behavior to chemical weapon exposure. They recovered consciousness eventually, were evacuated to Germany for treatment. But they were never the same. Cooper's hand unconsciously moved to a small scar behind his ear. They would lapse into unknown languages during debriefing. Wade attacked an orderly with unnatural strength during a violent episode. And sometimes, when I looked into their eyes, something else looked back. Something old and patient. Something that had found not one vessel but three. Something that waits even now for its fragments to reunite. I don't believe we destroyed it. I believe we only succeeded in dividing it, weakening it temporarily. And every night, I still hear whispers in the ventilation system of my apartment, still feel the pull to write in symbols I shouldn't know, still fight against the presence that waits for my guard to drop, for just one moment of weakness,